Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for the very best in college football conversation, discussion, and debate. We've got Will Gunter on the line from the all-new early game, 107.5 The Game. Of course, we talk up South Carolina, but also go throughout the SEC and the nation. Will, how you doing this morning?
Doing good, man. Trying to get through. Amazing that we're already halfway through May, and before you know it, we'll be into June, and then SEC media days, all the media days, and fall camp, and it just like that. It'll be football season.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a good thing for the most part. For those of us up in the Northeast, not so much. Let's hold on to the summer as long as we possibly can. For those folks who are joining us on Facebook and want to comment, it's difficult for me to get to all the comments. Join the chat on YouTube. Just go to MarkRogersTV.com. Ask us questions, comments. I'll monitor those. And if you have anything intelligent to say, anything to pass along in regards to comments and questions, I will certainly do that. If you just want to let us know that the SEC sucks, certainly feel free to do that. I'm not necessarily going to notice that and convey that to Will. I'm sure he's heard it once or twice. All right, Will, we've got South Carolina. Of course, this is the dead season between spring football and early August, and football coaches want it to be the dead season. No news. We don't want to hear about guys getting hurt or getting in trouble. You've got a situation there at South Carolina that I don't know a whole lot about. You mentioned the gentleman's name, so give us the latest in terms of South Carolina football.
Well, in terms of what's going on with the team, obviously the recent news has been more recruiting in regards to the 2018 season, landing the commitment of defensive back Nick Harvey, who started 12 games for Texas A&M in 2016 before a knee injury sidelined him for 2017. He'll be a graduate transfer and will have 1 year of eligibility to play. This was actually one of the better defensive backs, better cornerbacks in the league before a knee injury slowed him down in 2017. And then obviously he will come in and compete for a starting spot opposite of Rashad Fenton for the Gamecocks. This was a big pickup in terms of depth. He chose the Gamecocks over Auburn, Tennessee, and Arizona, and they get an all-league performer. The question will be, how healthy is he? There was some speculation he could have returned for the Aggies bowl game against Wake Forest, but chose not to do that. Took his redshirt year. With the addition of Jimbo Fisher as head coach, he elected to transfer, and the Gamecocks pick up some depth in the secondary. The other piece of interesting news has been in the last 2 or 3 days with Josh Belk, a 5-star defensive tackle out of Louisville High School, 4 or 5-star defensive tackle, was a class of 2018 recruiting prospect and signed with South Carolina's rival, Clemson, and enrolled early for the Tigers. Had been up in Clemson since January, elected to transfer this week and wants to go to South Carolina. Dabo Swinney has given him an unconditional release. The word is it is due to some family health issues in his family, and it is easier for him to go back and forth between Louisville and Columbia than it is Louisville and Clemson. So what has ended up happening is it appears South Carolina will actually pick up a big-time defensive tackle prospect, Josh Belk, out of Louisville High School. He was the #1 defensive tackle prospect in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. Last year, had a very good performance at the U.S. Army All-American game. It'll be a while before he actually transfers, but he will be in Columbia for the fall. And we'll see if he is able to get a hardship waiver and maybe be eligible immediately to play. If not, he'll use a redshirt year and certainly will have a chance to ingrain himself in the South Carolina program and develop and then see how things go. So it's been those have been the kind of the big news lately. Obviously, as we move through the month of May, players will return, of course, coming up here in June, and South Carolina will see the arrival of the remaining 7 freshmen from the 2018 recruiting class as they will get their summer workout session going.
We're live on Facebook and YouTube with Will Gunter. You can join him on the all-new early game, 107.5 The Game. He just wrapped up another 3-hour shift. It joins me at the beginning of my day, gets me up a little bit early, but it's well worth it to get out of bed to talk some South Carolina and college football with Will as much as I possibly can get to. He's a busy man and a wealth of knowledge and a good time with Will. So when you put it all together, Will, when you look at the current team, what Will Muschamp has been able to accomplish going from 3 wins to 6 to 9, and the incoming freshmen and the possible impact there, Vegas is telling us generally that this team's going to win 7.5 games. I don't know how they win the half, but Of course, that's to split the winners and losers. So it's a good thing for guys like me who want to project that sort of thing. Throw the half in there, make us make a decision. But 7.5 wins, so they either go 8-4 for those people that are optimistic to get the win, or 7-5. Looking at the schedule, of course, that's a huge factor. Your thoughts about what Vegas thinks of the Gamecocks?
Well, they have a lot of large hotels and great food for a reason. They don't lose a lot of money. But with that being said, I was a little surprised by that. You look at the schedule, and it does set up well for South Carolina. Obviously, the big question is going to be Brian McClendon and Dan Werner in the offense. Is this the year Will Muschamp puts a competent offense on the field, one that actually is inside of the top 100 statistically? And certainly there's a lot of reason to think that that will be the case with Jake Bentley back, with Debo Samuel returning, with the progress of guys like Shi Smith and Brian Edwards and Ortre Smith, with the running back situation, with the offensive line situation. So, I think what you end up getting is, are they an improved offense to match the defense? There were losses last year. Anytime you lose Sky Moore, that doesn't help. Taylor Stallworth along the defensive line was one of the more underrated defensive linemen in the SEC. So there were losses, but certainly when you look at the schedule and you see Coastal Carolina, you see Chattanooga, a trip to Vanderbilt, obviously on the docket, you would like to think that that's 3 wins. After that, it gets maybe a little bit murky. I think Marshall, you throw in, there's a 4th win. So can they beat Texas A&M at home? Texas A&M recruited really well under Kevin Sumlin, and Jimbo Fisher is a good coach. Can they beat Georgia? Can they beat Kentucky for the first time in 5 years? So there's a lot of games there. A trip to Mississippi is never an easy trip. Obviously, we know about Clemson and Florida and Tennessee, Missouri. It's another SEC schedule, but I do think that the 7.5 was a little low. I was a little surprised by it. I would have probably put the mark at 8.5, given the schedule and given what South Carolina has returning. But again, I understand there's going to be a lot of questions regarding the offense for Will Muschamp until we see it, and that really will end up being week 2 when Georgia rolls into town. I got a feeling they'll keep things still very conservative against Coastal Carolina in week 1, but for the Gamecocks, it's all about offense. Can they score points to show that Will Muschamp can live with that kind of style? And if they can, you would think the 7.5 is a very easy bet.
So when I look at that, Will, I tend to put the teams in collections. I put them in groups, looking at stretches of games, because there's very few teams in the country that seem to be an automatic loss. There's more teams for a good team like South Carolina that seem to be an automatic win, and you just ripped them off. Most of the non-conference schedule, automatic wins. Vanderbilt, probably at the top of the list in the SEC, is an automatic win, but certainly they're capable. And that's probably maybe an 80-20 proposition, depending on where the game's played. And then you got that group of teams, aside from Georgia, that I put almost in the automatic loss. If South Carolina pulls off the win, especially at home this year, I'm not going to be completely shocked, but Georgia's a better football team right now. Then you got that collection of teams that you just mentioned. Ole Miss is nothing to sneeze at, nothing to bypass in the SEC Western Division, and Texas A&M is going to be interesting under Jimbo Fisher with a lot of talent coming back. They've lost a lot as well. And then you got that collection of teams that I would consider South Carolina to be better than in the Eastern Division. They certainly were last year, but those teams are nipping right at their tail. Mizzou, Kentucky, Tennessee's got talent despite the disastrous finish last year. So they should be able to come out with better than that 7.5 win total if I'm looking at it as well. So I'm right there with you. I'm thinking 8 or 9 wins is certainly the goal, and a possible run at the SEC East. It's going to come down to that week 2 game against Georgia. Got Will Gunter on the line. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube. If you want to make comments, please go to YouTube where I can read them at MarkRogersTV.com. If you can't find my YouTube channel, it's easy. Just go to MarkRogersTV.com. That redirects you right there, and you can join the chat. All right, Will, as you look across the nation, we have the usual cast of characters as the preseason polls are starting to come out, not the official ones, but the magazines and that sort of thing. Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State on down the line. Those select few that seem to be in the running for a national championship, and now we can throw Georgia into the mix. Anyone out there that maybe a little bit off the radar that you kind of like, and maybe the flag's right behind you, maybe the banner's set up for you to take off on the Gamecocks, because I certainly think that they could make a bit of a dark horse run. But who do you like out there?
Well, I think I'm not going to go with South Carolina because I think I know a little bit too much about them, and maybe I'm a little biased. But let's start in the SEC. I think one team to keep an eye on is Texas A&M. For whatever reason, Kevin Sumlin couldn't quite get it done, and they do lose some good players. I mentioned Nick Harvey transferring out. Obviously, Christian Kirk is off to the NFL, but Jimbo Fisher's a good coach. Let's not take one bad season at Florida State and encompass Jimbo Fisher's entire career at Florida State with one bad season when he lost his starting quarterback in week 1 and they had the hurricane issue and everything that went down. It was a strange season for Jimbo Fisher. But under Kevin Sumlin, Texas A&M's recruited really, really well. That's a good football team. And if he can get the quarterback situation fixed early on, Nick Starkel or Kellen Mond, whatever direction he wants to go, I think that's a team that could surprise a lot of people because I do believe in Jimbo Fisher. And that's a team that not a lot of people are going to talk about because of the transition, because of the way they finished last year, because of the things that happened under Kevin Sumlin. And again, because of what happened to Jimbo Fisher. We live in a microwave world where it's I want it now, I want it instantly, and whatever just happened 5 minutes ago, I'm going to use as our reference point, not a full body of work. I think keep a close eye on Texas A&M this year, just because I think the talent level there is good enough for them to maybe jump up and bite somebody, maybe get Auburn in the middle of the season. I don't know if they can challenge Alabama. I don't know who can. But the bottom line is keep an eye when you talk about underrated teams. I think you want to instantly keep an eye on Texas A&M. I'll stay in the SEC for an overrated team. I know a lot of people are giving Mississippi State love. Nick Fitzgerald's back, and they've got some talented players. But Joe Moorhead in his first year, you don't see a lot of coaches. Even Kirby Smart came in his first year in the SEC and struggled with an 8-5 team that year and some inexplicable losses. I think the toughest conference in the country to come in is a first-time head coach, and I think Moorhead was the coach at Hofstra, I believe, prior to his stint as offensive coordinator at Penn State. But Mississippi State, I think, is being a little overrated. People are really buying into Joe Moorhead, but a first-time, big-time head coach in the SEC, they generally struggle. And I think Mississippi State, especially in the Western Division of the SEC, is in for a little bit more of a rougher season than they're being projected by. I see a lot of people projecting them as a top 20 team early on. So when you talk about overrated and underrated early on, I think I start in the SEC and look at those two particular teams.
When I look across the nation, USC jumps out to me as a wild card team. Not a whole lot is expected compared to their brand because they lose so much talent, but they play in a very weak division, one of the weaker divisions in college football. So is USC based on the talent on the roster? I think they have the best roster, but they're going to start a new quarterback. So do they maintain hold of the Pac-12 South, or does somebody else jump up with Kevin Sumlin coming in, Herm Edwards coming in, Chip Kelly coming in? Can one of those teams upset USC and win the Pac-12 South? And if for as weak as the division and the slate of teams in that division, hey, once you win the division, you're in the conference championship game, and who knows what's going to happen elsewhere. And that could be a real wild card for a college football playoff appearance, possibly, even though it appears Washington and Stanford are the two best teams in the conference. I look at Iowa as a possibility. Wisconsin holds the flag probably as firm as anybody in conference football. In any division in football, Georgia and Wisconsin seem to be clear favorites, but maybe Iowa jumps out. I know they've got Wisconsin at home. They got Nathan Stanley back at quarterback, and they are extremely tough at home. And so if they can hold serve and beat Wisconsin and gain that one-game advantage, Wisconsin's got to deal with Michigan, I know, on the other side. And speaking of the Wolverines, it's hard for me, for a team that's going to be ranked in the top 10, to say they're a dark horse, but I think just about everybody's going to check off the box Ohio State, as they typically do in the Big Ten East, where Michigan's got Shea Patterson now, and they've got a very talented roster. So those would be some teams that jump out to me.
I tell you, the team nationally, when you want to pick out the team, I think to keep a very close eye on is West Virginia. I love Will Grier, and he's going to come back this year. I think he's in college now for his 23rd season or something like that, and he's been around for a while. They've got an improved defense, and here's the thing I like about them: TCU is going to be good. Texas is going to be improved. Man, watch out for Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley stepped into a great situation with a lot of talented players, and Baker Mayfield was a fantastic college quarterback. I don't know how good he'll be with the Browns, but Lincoln Riley, who's very smart, stepped into a great situation. Now, whether it's Kyler Murray at quarterback or Austin Kendall, I'm fascinated to see what Oklahoma looks like. And I like West Virginia. I think they're going to start somewhere between about 18 and 23, 24. So they're going to be on the back end of the top 25. But Dana Holgorsen was a guy that a lot of people thought might get fired last year. He's got some speed up there at the skill positions. Will Greer is back. That's kind of, you talk about a national team, because I know you mentioned Southern Cal. Southern Cal is going to be on the back end of the top 25. And what you were saying about the quarterback position, I agree. We'll see who ends up taking that role and running with it. Southern Cal can be a bit of a disappointment at times. I still like Clay Helton. But when you talk about a team on the back end of the top 25 that I think could surprise people, I think you're looking directly at West Virginia, because I love the quarterback in Will Greer. And in Dana Holgorsen's offense, he's going to put up massive numbers. And then you talk about a guy that's improved his defense. I think has made some changes to how they want to do things schematically. I like West Virginia a lot. Maybe it's your dark horse contender to go into November a lot closer to the college football playoff race, maybe in the top 6 than people are giving them credit for. And they've got an interesting non-conference game on the road early in the season, I think September 15th, in Raleigh at NC State. You win that game, all of a sudden, kind of the sky's the limit, looking down to the showdowns with TCU, with Oklahoma, even an improved Iowa State team.
Yeah, I could see the other 4 conferences really going to the chalk and being the typical run-of-the-mill teams that we're used to seeing. But the Big 12 could be really fun, because I think, like you say, Oklahoma is going to slide back down into the pack, still be the leader going into this thing. But Texas, despite the losses last year, losing 5 games, they got better down the stretch. I know they lost a lot on defense, but Tom Herman, second season, I'm going to go along with the narrative with a Jimbo Fisher, really good coach. He's got his team, his program in place for a full year, got the philosophy working, and he's working out the kinks, and now he just needs to select a quarterback. I think the defense is going to be really good again. They played within 1 score in overtime of Oklahoma State last year. And yeah, TCU, West Virginia, Kansas State, that bunch, I think there's that second tier in the Big 12 that can compete, and West Virginia might be a good play because they've got Oklahoma in their backyard this year.
Well, again, what they get Oklahoma to wrap up the season. I mean, you look at their non-conference. West Virginia's, they're going to open the season against Tennessee. They've got that NC State game. The one game that I look at, they do have to go to Texas. Again, Iowa State, Ames is a weird place, and you go out there, and depends on the weather and the crowd and everything. But they get TCU at home. They get Oklahoma at home to end the season on the 23rd. They do have that road trip to Texas, but I like Will Greer. I think they're going to go point for point with anybody. And I'm not willing just yet to buy into Tom Herman. Tom Herman walked into a great situation with Greg Ward Jr. at Houston. Really good situation. If Chad Morris had gotten the Houston job, I say this today, would Chad Morris have been the hot commodity 2 years ago and not having to continue to build SMU? I think he would have. I think Tom Herman benefited from a great Houston team. I think this is a maker. I hate to say it in year 2 at Texas, but we know the expectations for the Longhorns. It's a make or break year with Shane Buechele and the other quarterback whose name just completely left my mind.
Sam Ehlinger.
Thank you, Sam Elliott. Yeah, I always want to say Sam Elliott, and I know that's not right, but you know darn well that fits perfectly with the mold of that with Texas. But Sam Ehlinger and Shane Buechele, I hate having it when you're going into a season with 2 quarterbacks in that situation, and you want to play one and you don't like to play 2. I think that's going to be a detriment to Texas. Keep an eye on West Virginia. The schedule with TCU and Oklahoma coming to Morgantown, having to play Tennessee and NC State early on, it sets up for, again, West Virginia to be mid-October or late October, right there in the top 6 of the college football playoff race.
And the thing about Texas's decision with quarterbacks is, it's one thing if you've got a situation where you've got 2 quarterbacks, similar style, basically the same type player, and you just need to decide who's better, versus they've got a runner and they've got a thrower. So they better decide soon. And I'm sure Tom Herman's got some idea in his back of his mind in terms of the competition heading into August, but it either sways Ehlinger and a run-heavy offense. He's kind of a spirited guy who loves to run, take on linebackers, past the line of scrimmage. And then you got Shane Buechele, who's more the cerebral guy, the quarterback, the pocket passer guy. they can just move around a little bit. So that changes the philosophy of the offense and which way you go as well. So you're kind of changing the direction of the team based on that decision. The thing with USC is they've got the very two difficult games outside of conference, Texas and Notre Dame. And they start off the conference season difficult with Stanford. So in that first month, it's Texas, it's Stanford, it's the Longhorns on the road. So maybe they do what we saw a couple of years ago with Sam Darnold. They get off to the rough start with like a 1-2 start. Then they get hot. Their quarterback starts to feel the rhythm, get some reps under his belt, and then they're maybe the best team in the Pac-12 by the time all is said and done. They've already lost 3 games, so they're out of the playoff mix. So we'll see with an interesting situation at USC. All right, we got Will Gunter on the line from the all-new Early Game. You can catch him on 107.5 The Game right there in Columbia, South Carolina. So we love to kick around the Gamecocks, but also the nation. And Mike Slive passing away a few days ago, unfortunately, at the age of 77. And what the SEC was able to accomplish under his watch from 2002 to 2015 is just beyond impressive. So I'll leave it right there for you, Will, in regards to what jumps out at you. I wrote down a litany of items in another discussion with Mike Laval yesterday in regards to what Slive achieved, and taking it from what Roy Kramer established as the marquee conference in college football and college athletics, and then handing it off to Greg Sankey in great shape.
I'm a big Mafia guy. I always compare Mike Slive to Carlo Gambino. Very unassuming, very inauspicious. You don't really see it coming, and the guy got the job done. Mike Slive, from my opportunities, and it's not that I interviewed him a lot or had a personal relationship with him, but the few times, the 3 or 4 minutes I'd ever get to deal with him at SEC Media Day was as nice and as cordial as a person you could ever meet. With that being said, I have a feeling when they got into the meeting rooms at the SEC, the meetings, the summer meetings in Destin, Florida, Mike Slive's voice was the loudest and most powerful, and you either did it his way or you found another way down in another conference or down the road. And Mike Slive, it's amazing to me. Roy Kramer, you look at what Roy Kramer did with the SEC, the initial expansion with South Carolina and Arkansas, the SEC football championship game that takes place in Atlanta now, it's such a big deal. The building of the conference to where it was, and somehow, some way, Mike Slive comes in, little Mike, Carlo Gambino comes in, takes control of the Mafia up there in New York and builds that thing into a powerhouse. Mike Slive does the same thing. He takes something that was already heading in the right direction and made it a monster with the national championships. He made it a monster in basketball. He made it better in basketball. I shouldn't say a monster. But he reformed the league, and right here in Columbia, South Carolina, and you can say for both Columbias, Missouri and South Carolina, it's interesting to see something that just happened this year in women's basketball with Dawn Staley and with Jim Sirk, the SEC, the athletic director, I believe it was Sirk, the SEC, the Missouri athletic director, and how we've got a situation where you have a coach and Dawn Staley suing an athletic director for Missouri over defamation of character because of some of the things that the Missouri athletic director said about the South Carolina women's basketball coach. You never would have seen that under Mike Slive. He would have brought them into the office. They would have gotten to the bottom of it. It would have been handled, and we would have never reached that point. And I think with Greg Sankey, you see that. It's a tough job to hold in a bunch of egos that are the 14 teams, 14 programs in the SEC. Mike Slive did a phenomenal job doing it. Especially in a day and age when Jim Delaney of the Big Ten had no problem whining and crying about revenue or about his football teams being left out or whatever it may have been. You had Jim Delaney on one side and Mike Slive on the other. I think it's phenomenal what Mike Slive did and where he was able to take this conference on the heels of Commissioner Kramer.
Pick a sport, any sport, and the SEC excels in it. And I'm not going to run down the 20 men's and women's sports. There might be one out there that the SEC's not succeeding in, but I don't know what it is. So we're talking college football, and we always do, and that's our focus. But I was in the league for 6 years covering all the sports, and nothing's changed in terms of tennis, baseball, softball, cross country, golf. The SEC is near the top of the top 10 list with a load of teams in all those sports and beyond. We know what the dominance was in football. Right now, they're at the top, but there are challengers, and it's a great discussion right now. But for 7 years, they locked it down under Mike Slive. The money, the attendance, the wins, the championships, whatever metric you want to go to, the SEC is difficult to argue against. And like you say, similar to the Roy Kramer visionary thought of a championship game and then bringing in South Carolina and Arkansas at the time and having that vision of expansion, Mike Slive falls in place with Mizzou and Texas A&M, when at the time it wasn't a slam dunk for Texas A&M. It's easy to say now, of course, that's the move for Texas A&M to make, to go to the SEC. But at the time, their thought was maybe they get stampeded in the SEC. They get forgotten. They're the stepchild off to the side that's not going to get much due in this conference. It's going to be difficult for them to recruit maybe out of the South and that sort of thing. Maybe they lose out to the rivalry to Texas in the Big 12, just in regards to the other things he accomplished, just in regards to revenue. So obviously, because of inflation and because of the expansion of college football, all the conferences are making more money year in, year out, just based on, again, the expansion of college football and the popularity. But to go from 95 million per team in revenue in the beginning of his tenure to go to 95 million to 456 million is pretty amazing. African-American hires at the highest level of college football, starting with Sylvester Croom. That's to his credit, as well as just, again, the way he was able to clean up the conference, just programs all over the place, in trouble, under investigation, under probation. I was in the middle of it when I covered Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Alabama. All three were on probation in the 6 years that I was down there, and he's cleaned it up to a certain extent. It's always going to be an issue and going to be a challenge to deal with for any conference, but he really laid it on the administrators and the coaches to clean things up.
Don't forget the SEC network. I mean, that's you talk about going from that. I mean, that guy, again, it's very unassuming, very nice. One of the greatest guys to deal with. Not that I had a personal relationship or spent a ton of time with him, but he was gracious enough at SEC Media Days. He would stop by a radio table or wherever and shake hands and say hello, and knew how to work the room. And then again, I think when he was in a private room with any issue, he knew how to get his way and make sure that the conference got the best end of the bargain.
The Big 12 made a big mistake in allowing Texas to go off on its own with its own network and leave the rest of them behind. The Pac-12 network, I don't get it. I literally don't get it. And I also don't receive it. And I understand that the programming is decent, but not much of the nation can see it, find it. The Big Ten Network would be a strong second to the SEC Network, but you see a clear delineation between the SEC Network in making sure that, hey, we're locking arms with ESPN. Therefore, we want to receive ESPN quality productions, both in games, documentaries, and you see it. There is no drop off in the quality of the product. It is top notch, as good as it gets on the SEC Network. So well done by Mike Slive. And our condolences to the family and friends, certainly. The landmark decision this week, as we are joined by Will Gunter from 107.5 The Game, is the Supreme Court's decision to give sovereignty to each individual state in regards to sports gambling, after there was a federal law passed in 1992 that banned sports betting. So, Will, this changes the game, pardon the pun there, in regards to a lot of us, and from the business side and from the league side, looking professionally, or the conferences and the NCAA, in terms of who do we need to watch out for to keep our sport clean?
You know, I'm 36. I turned 36 2 weeks ago, and I don't see a change. I think this is an overblown story, and I'll tell you why. I think people my age, I remember being in college, and I think statute of limitations applies here. I think I can get away with what I'm about to say. Being in college 15, 16 years ago and gambling on games, I've grown up around that. My generation has been able to go on websites that are based out of Ecuador, different countries. I can't think of them at this moment. and place bets. For me, placing a bet doesn't mean I'm calling down the street to the local guy and betting with credit. It means I put money into Bovada or Bodog or Five Dimes or whatever it may be, and I can go on and I can click a button and bet. Gambling, I get it, in the country has been illegal, but obviously Costa Rica, I think was the one I was trying to think of, is some of the things you've been able to go on the internet and bet. I have a friend who's gone and bet on 8 a.m. soccer games in India. Um, you know, like so people are saying, well, oh my goodness, now we're opening it up. It's going to change, and it's going to. No, this has been going on. It hasn't been what it is for the economy, especially for my state, if done properly, helps the economy. But the people that are worried about it changing the sporting landscape because all of a sudden, oh goodness, now you open it up. How? I mean, this has been going on, but gambling has been going on, whether it's professional sports or collegiate sports. People are going to say, well, now all of a sudden the players, you got people gambling on collegiate sports, on football, baseball, basketball, and the players don't make a dime. You have fantasy football that pays out millions upon millions of dollars. I don't understand how people think that this is going to change the game that much. Okay, maybe now as I walk to a football game, maybe there's a stand on the side of the road where I place a bet instead of going on my smartphone and tapping in something. Maybe that's I haven't figured out. And again, I think it's a generational thing. I really do. And I'm not telling you you're old, to
You
me,
don't need to tell me I'm old, Will. I know it.
I really think that people we've grown up again. I've been able to go, if I want, on my phone here for years and put in a bet on a website. And then if I win, I take the money back. I can get the money back out. It's deposited back in my account. If I lose, then the money that I put in, that I direct deposit out of my account, you get the point. I'm not saying I do that all the time now. Kids and bills and things that money needs to go to. But the bottom line to me is I don't see where this changes things. If you can tell me where it changes things, how all of a sudden it'll corrupt an NBA basketball game or a college football game or an NHL game, tell me, because I don't see it. This has been going on. It just now becomes legal so that if your local bookie gets pinched, now maybe you're not as worried about him ratting you out for owing $15,000 or $20,000. I think it's the exact. I don't see a difference here. What I think is, outside of sports, it improves the local economy. My big thing has always been for the state of South Carolina. Myrtle Beach, I'm sure if you're listening, you're watching, Myrtle Beach is a tourist attraction. There's a million golf courses. It's great beaches. To put casinos down there and make it a southern Atlantic city where people can come down and you can play golf 12 months a year. Now you can gamble. You can do all. They've got a casino boat down in Myrtle Beach, in the northern end of Myrtle Beach, Cherry Grove area, that you can take out now and play card games and whatever you want as soon as it gets into international waters. I don't. We talked about this on our radio show. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm young. Maybe I've grown accustomed to it and I'm numb to it. I don't see how it changes the game. I don't see how it affects sports across the board, because you're not going to all of a sudden have more people now calling up the local quarterback going, hey, I need 3 interceptions this game so that we can win $20,000.
Point well taken. It goes on. I know tons of people, including myself, that engage in it already. And this just brings it into light. It's going to take a long time, depending on the state, to take hold. We know about New Jersey being at the forefront and being apparently ready to go within the next few months or next 30 days. And then about 5 or 6 other states that already have the legislation in place to pass it, and then it's going to have to be established, and they're going to have to come up with rules and an infrastructure and process within the particular states to make sure it's done above board and everybody's on board with the way it's supposed to take place.
But again, I think that's the thing. In terms of how it affects sports, is not the same as how it affects the local economy, that's a totally different political discussion that I'm not prepared to have, because I have no clue. But when you talk about how does it affect the South Carolina Georgia game in week 2, am I worried about the quarterback throwing again 3 interceptions, or does it affect the purity of the game? Again, this has been going on. Mark, you could go to Vegas, and if I have a game that I want to bet on, I could call you in Vegas and go, hey, Mark, put a G down for the Gamecocks over the Bulldog, for -7 or 8, and then you go do it. what's the difference? What exactly is the difference in me calling a buddy in Vegas right now who's out there having a vacation and saying, "Hey, take the Yankees tonight minus the 1.5 on the run line and put money down." I don't. In terms of sports purity, I think it's being overblown.
So I think that there is a thought process that goes back to the dark ages of there was a time I've read through the history of baseball. There was a time early on in the Ty Cobb Babe Ruth years in which you could go right to the stadium and lay a bet, and there were some underhanded dealings going on. We know about the Black Sox scandal of 1919, 1917, something in that range. And so I think there's a thought process again that there's an element there that's not as honest and forthright and just an individual process like you or me wanting to lay $100 on a ball game. There's an element of, okay, we are riding millions of dollars in this direction, therefore we need to do what we can to get hold of people to influence a sporting event.
Yeah, I still you can tailgate if you got a local bookie. You can tailgate with that guy, or he can stand in the parking lot and be inconspicuous, and you walk up to him. I mean, I don't. Again, to me, in terms of sports purity, I don't see the change. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe in 5 years we're all concerned about LeBron James shooting 529 against the Celtics and costing himself a game because he's on the back end of his career and needs the money. We'll see what happens. I just don't see how it affects sports. I just nothing is going to happen now that isn't already happening.
It's certainly good news for a lot of people that don't go through the current applications that you need to go through to do so, and for those that want to spend a weekend elsewhere and not in Vegas and go to other locations that you just mentioned and be able to take part as well. So it's going to change from that standpoint, more from the consumer standpoint than hopefully any other negative connotations or realities that could happen. All right, Will Gunter from the all-new Early Game 107.5 The Game joining us to talk South Carolina, the SEC, and the nation. Will, we appreciate it, and you enjoy your weekend.
That's the plan. It's supposed to rain down here, so maybe Memorial Day weekend, but I'm sure there'll be a boat trip in the future, but I'll enjoy it.